Dear students, let me introduce myself. Bogdanova Antonina Vladimirovna, candidate of Pedagogical Sciences, Associate Professor, Department of Teaching Methods of Institute of Pedagogy and Psychology of Education in Moscow City University. You are watching the lectures on the discipline Primary Language Education in Multicultural Environment. The theme of the current lecture is Terminology and Language Education Policies in Multicultural Environment. Now we start. Speaking about terms and definitions, we should start with such terms as multilingualism and plurilingualism. Multilingualism refers to the presence in a geographical area, large or small, of more than one variety of language that is the mode of speaking of a social group, whether it is formally recognized as a language or not. In such an area, individuals may be monolingual, speaking only their own variety, or plurilingual. The term plurilingualism means the ability of a person or of an individual to use languages for the purposes of communication and to take part in intercultural interaction, where a person has proficiency of varying degrees in several languages and experience of several cultures. This is not seen as the superposition or just juxtaposition of distinct competencies, but rather as the existence of a complex or even composite competence on which the user may draw. It refers to the repertoire of varieties of language which many individuals use, and is therefore the opposite of monolingualism. Plurilingualism also includes the individual's mother tongue or first language. It is dynamic and changes over a lifetime of a person, of all the individuals who are plurilingual. As you know, bilingual individuals have a degree of competence in two languages or in two varieties of a language. It is thus sometimes used, such a term, to designate a person who speaks two varieties of the same language, for example, Low German and High German, or Swiss German and High German, and so on. Plurilingual, such a term designates those individuals who speak more than two languages or varieties of languages. All in all, there is no essential difference between being bilingual or plurilingual. Both terms are also used to describe countries, regions, or localities. A country with two or more official languages is described as bilingual or multilingual, but a country in which there is one official language, but many people who speak other languages in their daily lives, is also called multilingual. Speaking about other terms which are associated with multilingualism, plurilingualism, or monolingualism, they are additive bilingualism. Such a term is used when we describe the learners who speak the dominant language of their society and they are adding a new language to their repertoire. Such a situation is described as additive bilingualism. In Such situations where speakers of a minority language are in similar situations of immersion in the dominant language of a society, their first language is not supported by the environment, they often lose or do not develop their first language. This is called subtractive bilingualism. The term used before, dominant language, refers to the language or the language variety in which an individual has the highest competence, either in general or with respect to a particular domain of life or a particular theme of discussion or writing. It can also be used to refer to the status of the language over others in a given country. The dominance of the language in one region may give way to the dominance of another in another region. In the case of the social dominance, the reference is above all to use in public institutions or in the public domain in general, where it has a formally official or informally accepted higher status. National language is the term used to designate the languages dominant in a state and used in all public domains. It is often directly associated with nationality, but nationality may not coincide with citizenship, and language can be the focus of identity for major groups in a country as it is for minorities. National languages can be given official language status in law or constitution. Thus, national language and official language are often synonymous, but please pay attention that national language carries emotional associations as an indicator of nationality. Earlier, we mentioned such a term as first language. First language is a scientific term to what is more popularly called the mother tongue. It refers to the language acquired first in early childhood, which has a special status for the child as it is acquired as part of its discovery of the world in primary socialization and is in fact crucial to the success of the child in developing normally. Without interaction through the first language in early childhood, development is likely to be abnormal. For bilinguals or plurilinguals, the first language may in fact be more than one language if the child is exposed to and uses more than one language to acquire knowledge and experience of the world. Another term we should discuss now is foreign or second language, which is the language acquired through formal learning in an educational institution or informally, by exposure to the language in the environment in which one person lives. It is not the language of early childhood and primary socialization. Thus, the scientific literature on the acquisition of languages refers to second language acquisition. Acquisition by informal exposure to a language in the environment is typically the case of migrants or immigrants. Now we should speak about the distinction between foreign language and second language, between these terms, which is more important in describing the social environment in which learners acquire a language. If they can acquire another language present in their environment, irrespective of whether they have formal lessons, special classes, language classes or not, then their opportunities and needs are different from those learners who are exposed to another language only in a classroom. This is second language learning, when foreign language as a term is typically a language which is spoken widely and often as official or national language in another country, with which the learner has limited or no contact except in the classroom, whereas a second language surrounds the learner on a daily basis. I suppose you have heard such a term as exotic language, and maybe you know some exotic languages or have abilities and skills in them. Exotic language is, as a term, is not used in scientific descriptions of languages, but it betrays rather the perceptions people of one geographical region may hold of languages from a distant country or region. And for a given group of learners, exotic languages may be properly designated as more difficult than others. This is a function of the ways in which languages develop and form language families, where several languages can be traced back to the same origins. Contemporary languages with the same origins share some underlying similarities which facilitate language learning. It also means that in some language families there is intercomprehension. Languages of different families are less easy to learn since there is less existing unconscious or conscious knowledge which can be transferred from the learner's existing language competence to other languages. The fact that languages can be grouped in families according to their origins mean that those which are descendants from the same origin may be intercomprehensible. That is, if the speakers each speak their own language, they can be understood by the others, and they can understand each other. The degree of understanding depends on a number of factors, which are the topic of conversation or correspondence, the ways in which the participants make efforts to help their listeners, the speed and clarity of pronunciation of the speakers, and the awareness the participants in the conversation have of their potential difficulties, which can lie and can be complicated for the listeners, and how to find other ways of expressing themselves. The degree of intercomprehension is increased in reading the written language, but this also requires a degree of awareness of the relationships between languages, which can be enhanced by teaching. Irrespective of such linguistic proximities, the least costly forms of communication are those which are based on mutual comprehension, where each person speaks his or her language and understands the language of the other, of the speakers, of the communicants. The term heritage language is used to refer to first languages of immigrants. Immigrants often feel they should quickly acquire the dominant language of their new country or region they live now, and in doing that, they may use their first language or languages or language of their origin very little. Some immigrants deliberately avoid speaking their first language to their children in order to facilitate their acquisition of the dominant language in the new environment. At the same time, first language is psychologically important for the first generation of immigrants because they first developed as children through that language, and that influenced them psychologically. It influenced their understanding of the environment, their understanding of life, and their thinking. It also is perceived as important to subsequent generations as a symbol of their origins and identities. Indigenous and immigrant language are used almost exclusively to refer to the languages of ethnic or religious minorities, although they could equally be used for socially dominant languages. The distinction is ultimately arbitrary, since there are few regions of Europe where languages currently spoken did not arrive from other regions at some point in the past as a consequence of migration. The term minority language means the languages spoken in a society by minority ethnic or religious groups. The status of minority does not necessarily refer to numbers of speakers, but to the rights and privileges of groups in society, to their rights to educational institutions, to representation before the law, to access to certain types of employment, to have their own mass media, and some others rights and privileges. Many such groups attach very great importance to the use and maintenance of their language for use in society, and now you can understand why. In particular, they demand the use of their language as a medium of instruction in their own schools and universities, in the system of education, and as a medium of transactions in social institutions such as courts of law, banks, and media. The term vernacular language refers to, first, the language which is widely spoken in a particular geographical area, even though another language might be deemed the official language, or to a language of wider communication on an international level. For example, in the Middle Ages, Latin, which was used throughout Europe for international communication, was contrasted with the vernacular languages spoken in different countries at that time. Speaking about different terms used with the word language, we should differentiate them with the varieties of languages, which are registers, dialects, and accent. Consciously or unconsciously, people vary their language according to the situation, to the topic, to the people with whom they are interacting, that is, according to the use. They speak or write in more or less formal ways, in ways which are more or less close to the standard language norms determined for a national or official language. Dialects. People of a particular geographical area or particular social group may have a variation on the standard language, which they all use, particularly when speaking. They have different word forms, different grammar, different habits of speech. This reflects their sense of belonging to an area or to a group, and the variety is shared by all the speakers who are in that group or who live on that territory. There is variation according to users of a language rather than the use of the language. And one more term we mentioned before is accent in the varieties of languages. It refers and reflects in the pronunciation as well as in the form of the language. It is also possible to speak the standard language with an accent which varies from that deemed to be standard, without varying in other aspects, for example, grammatical forms. A language which is used to communicate between people with different native languages is called lingua franca. The term originates from a language used in the Mediterranean in the Middle Ages among traders. That language was based on a combination of French and Italian with Greek and Arabic elements. In other cases, one existing language is used, that is, the language of dominant communities. The reach of a lingua franca can range from its use in an institution where there are speakers of several languages speaking the lingua franca to a major geographical region. For example, the language Swahili in Eastern and Central Africa, or an international use. The international use is currently dominated by English, with other languages also playing this role. In Europe, usually a lingua franca is a natural language, but simplified natural languages, called pidgins or artificial languages, have also been used as lingua franca and can also be used as lingua franca. The term language as medium of instruction designates the language in which the teaching of other subject is called out in schools and universities, is used there. Usually the dominant language of the society is used in such situations for that purpose, though languages of indigenous or immigrant minorities may also be used. That gives status to the languages and ensures that those who speak them as their first language also become literate in their first language. It is widely agreed that children prosper better in education if their first years of schooling, and in particular their acquisition of literacy, take place in their first language, even if this is not the dominant language of a society. This is advanced as a justification for the use of minority languages as media of instruction in the early years of schooling. A medium of instruction other than the first language is introduced later in secondary education, either to teach one or two subjects, for example in Germany, or to teach the whole curriculum as it is in Bulgaria. These programs are aimed at enhancing the effectiveness of foreign language learning by greater exposure to and increased use of the language in a greater variety of ways. This has become a major development in many countries under the acronym CLIL or CLIL, Content and Language Integrated Learning as Technology. As for the terms used with the word language, it is also important to distinguish written language and spoken language for educational reasons. Unless there are congenital defects or lack of exposure to a language, all children learn to speak a language as a natural part of their development, with some help from their parents or others taking care of them. The acquisition of the ability to write is not natural and needs to be taught. The ability to write requires quite different capacities from those of speaking and usually includes the ability to create texts of specific genres according to specific rules and expectations. Writing is then used as one of the indicators of successful education and as a means of selecting people for further education, employment, and the like. Multicultural environment is a place where members of different cultures interact and experience intergroup relations and results. Multicultural environment means diversity in terms of ethnicity, gender, religion, social belonging, and some others. A multicultural environment retains workers from a variety of cultural backgrounds. The work in such environments differs regarding various approaches to time, information, planning, decision-making, relationships, communication style, power, conflict resolution, developing leadership, and motivation. Since Europe is a multilingual area in its entirety and in any given part, the sense of belonging to Europe and the acceptance of European identity is dependent on the ability of children, of students, and people to interact and communicate with other Europeans using the full range of one linguistics repertoire. It means that plurilingualism, individual plurilingualism, has a significant influence on the evolution of European identity. Other main principles of language education in European countries and in Europe as a territory are: plurilingualism is plural, plurilingualism is possible, and plurilingual education is practical. As you remember, Europe is a multilingual area, and it is very important for each personality to have the sense of belonging to Europe and to accept the European identity. As we have just discussed, it is dependent on the ability of a person to communicate, to interact with other people from Europe, and to use in their communication full range of their linguistic repertoire. Another principle is called like that: plurilingualism is plural. What does it mean? Plurilingualism of individuals has to be appropriate to the area where these people live, and no preferred or recommended model of plurilingualism exists. Plurilingualism of the individual or of a person may change with mobility and throughout lifelong learning during the life. Plurilingualism is a matter of competence, and it's an attitude of interest in and openness towards languages and language varieties of all kinds. Another principle is that plurilingualism is possible. The potential for all individuals to become actually plurilingual is proven. The technical capacity for developing plurilingualism is available in language teaching methodology and already released in practice, even though it is not widespread. Opportunity to develop one's plurilingualism should and can be made available to citizens of European education systems and in the context of lifelong learning. And the last principle of language education in Europe is that plurilingual education is practical. Education policies, curriculum patterns, teaching methods exist, and they permit the reconsideration of existing concepts of first, second, third, and other language, and the development of a plurilingual competence which enables individuals to acquire whatever language they need or are interested in at a given point in time. Now we should go from the European education to the Russian tradition in polycultural education. Polycultural education, or interethnic education as another term used in our tradition in science, is interpreted as an extension of national education to creating an awareness about numerous nationals among people. It is seen as an essential element of interethnic education as a factor of identifying the problem. As an object of the school policy, Russia is multi-ethnic and multicultural. It is heterogeneous. Polycultural education extrapolates the social and political, cultural and ethnic characteristics of the Russian society. Polycultural education is being viewed as an integrative and pluralistic process with the following three main sources. As you can see, they are now in the slide: Russian, national, which is not non-Russian, and universal human. The leading role refers to the Russian culture, which for the non-Russian nations and ethnic groups is a basic connection to the world spiritual values. Multicultural education then appears as an effective mode of communication and with the all Russian civil, political, economic, and spiritual values. The technologies of polycultural education in Russia follow the state federal standards of education and account for age, religion, and national specificities. Thus, in preschool and early school age, within the framework of age approach, it is recommended to have forms and methods directed to the perceptual knowledge of life and recognition of cultural values, aesthetic and moral empathy. In adolescence, it is recommended to have technologies of forming moral foundations and choice of life goals, social maturity education, civil identification, inclusion of adolescents into the situation of choosing values, interpretation of these values, definition of moral and motivated relations with their values, help in the assessment and self-assessment of their actions and behavior, and involvement in cultural creativity. In high school age, it is recommended to have value-oriented and reflexive and creative educational technologies. From the standpoint of belonging to a certain region, the specificity of this region is taken into account, and the ethnic and cultural component is based on ethnic values as well. The educational policy is to find an optimal balance between the federal center and the regions, based on the convergence of education and training, taking into account cultural values and cultural dialogue. The school policy provides, on the one hand, self-realization of the citizens regardless of their nationality, and on the other hand, solves complex problems posed by the challenges of a multinational society. Dear students, in the following slides you will see the references you can use to read and to understand the lecture and the topic we have discussed today in details. So, and in this lecture we have discussed the following terms: multilingualism as the presence of languages, of several languages on a territory, in an area, and plurilingualism as the use of different languages or varieties of languages by an individual. And then bilingual and plurilingual, that can be referred to a person or to a country. A country can be bilingual or multilingual if more than one languages are used as official languages and dominant languages in these countries. Such other terms as additive bilingualism and subtractive bilingualism, dominant language and minority language, national language, official language as a status of the language in a law, in a constitution, first language, and the word combination mother tongue, which is non-scientific and is not used in studies in scientific works. Native language, foreign and second language and the difference between them, heritage language, indigenous language, immigrant language, minority languages, or minority language as the language of minority group in a society, in a country, second language learning, and foreign language or foreign language learning as the Russian tradition. Second language learning is the term used in European tradition and European education. Also, we discuss such terms as exotic language, vernacular language or languages, lingua franca, pidgin, artificial language, as a language which is created for special purposes, specially created. It is not vivid. Intercomprehension in some languages and between languages that have the same origin or the same root, and thus intercomprehension between the speakers who speak these languages. Intercomprehensible languages as a term and as a notion used in science. We also discussed and spoke about varieties of languages, not different types of languages or kinds of languages, but varieties of the same language, of one language, as registers and dialects and accents. Registers according to the use of these varieties of language by people, by person, by individuals, and dialects according to the users, and accent. We also spoke about language as medium of instruction. Dominant languages and languages of indigenous or immigrant minorities can also be used as languages as medium of instruction. We also mentioned the difference between spoken and written language, which is very important in education and for educational purposes, and the term multicultural environment. We look more precisely at main principles of language education policy in Europe and in Russia. In Europe, it has such principles as individual plurilingualism has a significant influence on the evolution of our European identity. Plurilingualism is plural. Plurilingualism is also possible, and plurilingual education is practical. We also spoke about polycultural education in Russia, about the term of polycultural education used in the Russian science, in our tradition. We also use another term, interethnic education, as synonyms. We mentioned three main sources of polycultural education in Russian and the educational policy in our country. As I have said, you can use these sources you saw in the previous slide and you have now in that slide to get more information and to look at the problem of the terms of polycultural or multicultural education and environment more precisely. Thank you for your attention and see you at the next lecture. Goodbye.